Hi there, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. Just to give you a bit of an intro to me, so I'm Lee White. I head up the BGSS Nottingham office. For those of you that haven't heard of BGSS, we are the UK's largest privately owned business and technology consultancy, about 1,700 people across the UK and now globally. I also head up the Newcastle upon Tyne office as of earlier this year, which is pretty cool. My background is in Java engineering back in the day, moving into team leadership, agile delivery management, and over the last couple of years, leading offices and such like. I also am the co-founder and facilitator of Agile Nottingham, which is a meetup group, which you're welcome to look into. We're all fully remote at the minute, so feel free to come and join us for that. I had the immense privilege of being the delivery manager on the project we're going to be talking about today, which is to digitise the service which provides the practical driving tests for the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency. So my involvement was from the discovery phase, which is the earliest phase of government projects, right through to essentially hand over to the DVSA team once the system was and the service was in production. So just to set a bit of context about what I'm going to be talking about from a delivery perspective, this is not a framework that you can pick up and use elsewhere. There are lots of iterations and inspection and adaptations that we made to our delivery processes throughout the project. But what we're going to share with you is some of the ways we learned things and some of the things we did, so you'll be able to have a few takeaways to use on your projects. I'll hand over to Paul now.
Thank you very much. So my name is Paul Bailey. I am Head of Design for Spark, and we're the design and innovation consultancy within BGSS. And I'm going to talk a little bit more today about the journey that I went on as well with Lee. I joined kind of later on at the alpha phase, but I'm really keen to kind of share how human-centered design was used to add oomph to delivery. And I'll be sharing some practical tips, which hopefully you'll be able to take away and apply in your own practice. So this journey that we went on, I guess for me, in many ways, it started here. This is a waiting room where I sat before taking my driving test. And when I did a bit of quick calculation back to when that was, it was 1992. It's quite a long time ago. But over the last couple of years, I've had an opportunity to spend quite a lot of time in these kind of environments, and I actually had the opportunity to go back to this test centre, and it had not really changed much since the time that I took my driving test back in 1992. And they're quite strange environments. I don't know how many of you actually taken a driving test, but it's one of those experiences that you never forget. And this room that you go into and wait in before actually taking your test, it's got quite a strange kind of aura in it. You know, it's a bit like waiting in a dentist's waiting room. And there's a lot of an emotional kind of energy and tension in these spaces. And I think there's something like 370 of these waiting rooms across the UK. And over the last couple of years, I've spent quite a lot of time watching the dramas unfold there. And they're a stage really for people's emotions. You know, there's disappointment when somebody's failed for the 6th time. But they're also a place of celebration and triumph when people come back and they've heard those 6 joyous words from their examiner. I'm pleased to say you've passed. This is a picture of a friend of mine called Jordan. And he actually was taking his driving test while I was actually working on this project. And for him, it was really life-changing experience. He really desperately wanted to pass. You know, he'd taken a few tests. I won't tell you how many, but he really needed, for him anyway, to be able to drive and get that sense of freedom, and it would mean that he could commute to a new job. And it was a life-changing moment for him. It was really an experience that I don't think many of you really forget once you've gone through it.
So to kind of set the scene a little bit for you, so the project we were working on was for the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, and they are the Department of Transport's executive agency, responsible for ensuring that drivers and vehicles essentially are legally able to use the UK's road networks. So it has a 5-year strategy in place, and part of that strategy is to transform themselves into a digitally enabled organisation. So adopting user-centered design, agile ways of working to deliver better products, services and user experiences. So every year they undertake about 1.8 million practical driving tests in the UK. Obviously, over the last 12 months, it's probably been a little bit less than that. But in normal times, 1.8 million, that's a phenomenal amount. And this is was a completely paper-based process that's seen little change since I failed and my first test back in the early 90s for driving into a curb as soon as I left the driving test centre, and then passed it a year or so later. So very little had changed. It was an inefficient, outdated service. It needed modernisation. But what it did have was a super passionate team of people running it, but they needed digital expertise to really help them bring about the change. And that's where BGSS came into the equation. So like the majority of software delivery or service delivery projects out there, there are many challenges, and many of these will resonate with you if you've ever delivered a project similar to this. However, some of the points are important for us to note for you now, as they drove some of the methods that we put in place that we're going to talk about. For example, the stakeholders on the service team were new to digital, new to agile software delivery, but they were super keen, super clever, and really motivated to get this service digital. So, for example, out of one of the earlier phases of the project, a discovery, which I mentioned I was involved in, they received a really lightweight working prototype, which was just local. It wasn't integrated to anything, but they believed that was good enough for them. If we could just productionize that, that would be awesome. Obviously, we know as a software delivery consultancy and software experts, there's a lot more needs to be done there. And that's one of the things we had to kind of get them up to speed with. So we had a fixed timeline. DVSA did not have an infinite pot of cash and an infinite timeline. They had benefits to realize, so we had to adhere to timelines and budgets, as you would expect. This would be the fourth time this particular project had been tried. Obviously, there was a degree of reticence in the organization, and particularly some of the end users around, oh, we're going to be trying this again. Okay, let's see how this goes. In terms of the practical driving test itself, there are many different types of tests. So tractors, buses, cars, lorries, tanks, motorcycles, trailers. So that was going to be a challenge. Each one of those test types had their own eccentricities and difficulties and challenges, and most of them were served by a single driving test form, which was quite complicated. So we did have multiple suppliers in the mix, which is always a bit of a challenge. One of those suppliers ran the legacy service, which was the source of truth for data. We needed to integrate with those, and they did not work in a way that we would recognize as agile. The client team, who were going to take over the service once we delivered it to them, provided oversight to the project, so we needed to make sure our work was assured by them, and we had to adhere to some predefined tech choices in order to fit in with their support and continuous improvement models as they moved forward, and they were brilliant, by the way. And then finally, the team were scattered all over the UK and Europe, which is always a bit of a challenge, although in these diverse times in terms of remote working, it was less of an issue. But back in the day when we were allowed to kind of stand next to each other, it was a challenge for us. So we're not going to go into how we solved every single one of these elements, as we are mainly focusing on kind of user centricity and the overall delivery, but we are happy to take any questions afterwards or reach out to us on LinkedIn or Twitter or such like. So kind of moving on, you're probably thinking, if this talks about successful digital transformation in government, what does that kind of look like? So let's try and give you a kind of a summary of the service delivery in about 90 seconds. So if you grab your popcorn, and hopefully the technology will work.
DVSA is a road safety organisation. Our strategy is about keeping people safe on Britain's roads. We want that service to be modern, and this is a journey that we've started now with a test result capture using iPads.
When I became a driving examiner, I couldn't believe how much paper we used and how much paper we wasted.
All that paper needs to be stored in the driving test centre for 2 years as well. There's a high error rate where we can make easy mistakes.
We also had a lot of repetitive writing, a lot of postage. It didn't really work. It was an old system that we made work. We've been working with driving examiners from the start.
We had an early adopter network around the country, so every area, every test centre had a contribution to make.
We had twice monthly conference calls where we discussed any feedback that we had.
It got everybody on board because our feedback was taken into account as well, which was nice.
What really mattered is the 1,600 driving examiners out there were given the opportunity to see it, play with it, and give us their opinion. They're the people that really mattered on this project.
We've provided a lot of training to the examiners. We've got examiners who are, in their own words, are blind dinosaurs with sausage fingers. So we need to develop an app that they can feel confident in using.
We brought the iPads out before the digitisation had taken place, and so people got some degree of familiarity.
By doing things like that, we turn the ship around from, I don't want to change from paper, as to, when can I have it? I want it now.
The first test that we used the app was a little bit nervous, to be honest.
All my colleagues were very jealous that they were still writing things out and I was not.
I would definitely not want to go back to paper. In the mornings, I can just sit down and have a cup of tea until I go out on my first test.
This is a fantastic legacy project that's taken away 20 years of old ways of working and brought us into the 21st century.
To be involved in the project and be now using them is a brilliant thing. I'm glad to have been a part of it.
Nearly got it again. Okay, so spoiler alert, it went pretty well. Although a talk on a project failure would also be pretty interesting, right, in terms of what went wrong and things like that. But no, it did go really well. So just to kind of highlight some of the project outcomes that we got after we delivered the service. So in terms of the driving examiners, so the end users, so we saved them at least 15 minutes every day in terms of time they would normally have spent doing menial data entry tasks, which kind of relieves some of the pressure that was put upon them from having back-to-back tests, which obviously occasionally, if you hit a traffic jam, put additional pressure on those people and what's an already pretty pressurized job. And moving on to the examiners again, so about 60% of the examiners were aged over 50 and approximately 1 in 6 classed themselves as learning the ropes in terms of their position on the government digital inclusion scale. But 100% of the driving examiners adopted this digital service after delivering. The DVSA estimated cost saving of about £500,000 annually was a benefit they realised, and we got that through removing the need for printing, posting and processing all paper-based test results. So we created a more accessible service for people with additional and assisted digital needs. The test data was secured in the cloud, which removed the risk involved in manual posting and processing of results. And also we created a data analytics dashboard, which enabled service owners and ministers to make informed decisions based on live data. So we could kind of go on about the outcomes, but I guess the next question you're asking is, that's all well and good, but how did we actually get there? So to understand that, we need to take a look at the UK Government Guide to Digital Transformation. So if any of you haven't come across this before, definitely recommend you take a closer look. There's a link down at the bottom of the page there for you, or just Google Government Digital Service Standard and you'll find it. But what you'll see here is an overview of the stages of the service development for GDS projects, Cabinet Office digital projects, from discovery through to retirement. So each phase is focused on a different outcome. And the overall idea is that as the project develops, you reduce risk and uncertainty by having different checkpoints to make sure that your outputs are what you expected and you have an onwards plan with viability in terms of economic viability and also benefits realization. So the different phases are discovery, where you complete in-depth user, business and technical research. And essentially what you're trying to do is ensure there's a need for the product or the service to be improved. Then if that phase passes and you're assessed as successful, it moves through to alpha, where you rapidly test and evolve what you understand is the minimal viable product to deliver through rapid prototyping and testing with users. And then you also consider your strategy for assisted digital and accessibility. And what you're essentially doing is proving that your MVP, or the minimal amount of the service you need to improve, is technically possible. And you do that through that prototyping and testing with users. Successful in that phase, you move through to beta, which is fast agile delivery of high impact and quality assured viable propositions to market. So actually shipping the service out to a private, small subset beta group, which is fully integrated and ready to go, but with a subset of users, and you get fast feedback. Then you can roll out to public beta, which is everybody essentially. And then you move into the live phase, which is essentially continual operation and improvement of the service, measuring success, continuing to test with users. So finally, you might retire the product when it reaches the end of its life cycle. So that's what it's like on paper, but in terms of digital transformation in reality, I mentioned I was on the discovery phase earlier on. So what we're kind of going to focus on today is the alpha through to live, because that's the main element of the team which delivered the driving examiner service. So DES, we affectionately called it. So moving into the alpha phase, our objective at this stage was to expand our understanding of potential users and what they needed, to test different design ideas and prototypes with the likely users, and to learn how to build or improve the service so that it really helped those users to achieve their goals. So over the 14-week alpha, we interviewed about 100 people. We visited 25 driving test centres across the country. We identified 40 pain points in the current paper-based, or the then current paper-based user journey. And we designed and tested and released 8 prototypes to users to be tested. It was blinking hard work, but really valuable. And over the 14 weeks, we had the feeling that the developers on the team who were developing the prototypes, we felt we were only just ahead of them in terms of providing them with the user needs and the requirements that they needed to deliver. They were always on our tail. But we did successfully pass our GDS assessment 2 weeks early because we felt we were hitting the standard. And then just as the team really started to motor, get into the groove, the alpha phase was completed and the project went on ice for about 5 months. Now, this was because of the way the funding works and the approvals process internally. It's just one of those things. But as I say, the project went on hold for 5 months. After a while, though, we did get the nod that we would be moving into the beta phase, which was awesome. And this time we had 37 sprints, so 74 weeks to deliver the actual service, which sounds a lot, but there was a lot of stuff to be done. So this was going to be super intense with lots and lots to deliver. But we did a couple of things before the project kicked off that made a massive difference to the onboarding of a new team. So these are not official phases in the GDS life cycle. However, they're things that we felt were appropriate to our project to make the most of the service delivery. So first thing we had was what we called Alpha Plus. So this was a small team of people, including a delivery manager, lead user researcher, business analyst, tech lead. And these people were brought on before the start of the beta phase. So why did we do that? Well, what we wanted to do was to address some of the feedback we got from the GDS alpha assessment. We'd learned a lesson in the alpha phase that we were continually chasing to get ahead of the developers. So what we wanted to do was to plan user research activities for the first few sprints so that we could get ahead of the teams. And that meant feeding those user needs that we discovered into the backlog and making sure it was in really good shape so that the team were ready to hit the ground running. We wanted to take a look at some technical issues like hardware, software, integration, tooling, and get environments up and running. And we wanted to make contact with some of those third parties I mentioned earlier that were going to be a bit of a challenge for us. And all of those things helped us get a head start before we hit Sprint 0, or as we called it more officially in GDS, the Inception Week. So essentially, we knew we'd have a big team all starting at the same time, and we wanted to make sure that they could start delivering value as quickly as possible. So talk a little bit more about the delivery in a second, but first of all, let's take a look at the team. So this is the DES, or driving examiner service equivalent of our school photo. So we were a co-located team, and we had people traveling in from across the UK and Wales, Ireland, Poland, all over the place. But what we did aim to do was to have everyone on site as much as we could Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in the BGSS Nottingham office. And right from the start, because of our situation, we worked in a remote way. We used tools like Skype, Slack, Zoom, Miro, Trello, Confluence, and all of those good things to communicate, share, and work online. But one thing that's particularly unusual about this team profile is that DVSA had taken a multi-agency approach to the delivery. So we had people from Driving Vehicle Standards Agency, from BGSS, from Spark, and from another agency called Kanos right from the start. Now that might sound a little unusual, but what that did was enable us to benefit from a much wider knowledge base. And also DVSA was able to benefit from reducing the potential risk of using a single agency. Now, one of the challenges with that is how do you kind of manage that cross-supplier relationship? So we'll talk about the team profile in a second, but we also had a leave your badge at the door policy. So let's talk about that team structure. So as you can see from the diagram, the team was split essentially into two small multidisciplinary development teams called the Appy Tappers and the journalists. I wasn't responsible for the names, so I apologize for that, but the teams were very happy with them. And each structure was very similar. So two Scrum teams, if you're familiar with Scrum. And then what we had was a supporting structure sitting in the middle, which was kind of our product leadership team or service leadership team made of DBSA service owners, product experts, architects, infrastructure people, delivery management, and such like. So we had everything we needed to do a great job. And in terms of the suppliers that we talked about, it was blended. So we didn't have a BGSS and a Kainos team. The people were molded together into the teams together. It was blended. But running through that entire structure was a nice juicy layer of service design. So this meant that service design had a voice at all the tables, and this wasn't just a technology-driven project. So it also enabled us to apply the 4 principles of human-centered design. So understanding and addressing the core problems, being people-centered as opposed to technology-centered, using an activity-centered systems approach, so focusing on the entire activity rather than just isolated components. And it also enabled us to use rapid iterations of prototyping and testing. So we had the team, we had the structure. So the next question was about onboarding. So to talk about that, I'll hand you over to Paul.
Yeah, so going back to the point, Lee, you made earlier, we knew that from Alpha, stakeholders were really keen to get the devs coding. And at the same time that we knew we had an entirely new team, and they were going to be faced with wading through previous findings and trying to understand the project requirements and the insights that had been discovered so far. And we wanted to make sure that the project, this phase of the project, started in the right way with user needs. So we did a number of things during that inception week to turn it into more of an inception experience. So firstly, we recreated the environment that the whole driving test would take place in, and acted out the end-to-end experience. We wanted the team to really understand the end-to-end journey, which included multiple environmental settings. So you had an office, you had a waiting room, you had a car park, you had in-car, and it was important for the whole team to understand some of the ergonomic challenges of using an iPad to record outcomes in a moving vehicle. And perhaps more importantly than that, we wanted the team to start to feel empathy and understand what it felt like not only to be a driving examiner, but also to be a passenger. So all the people that were involved in this experience, to be able to kind of empathize with them and see it from their perspective. So to do that, we recreated a driving test center in the office. We marked out the different spaces on the floor, and we got different people in the team to essentially take their test, but also try and conduct a test as well. And as you can imagine, hilarity ensued as people passed and people failed, and it really helped to bring the whole experience to life. On day 2, we ran a Lego City activity, and if you've not done this before, I highly recommend that you take a look. I'd not encountered this until Lee introduced me to it, and I'm a big advocate. But it's a really brilliant way to get people together who perhaps haven't worked together before, and experience Agile in practice, what it actually feels like. And it was a really great way to actually start to get the team to gel together, and particularly people that were new to Agile to kind of understand what it means, what it is to do it, not just to read the framework. On day 3, we focused on GDS standards and principles. We knew we'd have to pass the GDS assessment, so we ran a workshop to review the Government Digital Service Standard, which if you're not familiar with it, there's a link there on this slide. And this was really in many ways to ensure that we started with user needs, and people that maybe hadn't worked within the GDS service standard previously started to become familiar with it, and we could identify areas where the team felt they needed to be addressed early, or even if there were maybe knowledge gaps that we needed to kind of identify and make sure that we had a really clear view of how we were going to get through the assessment and how we're going to work in a GDS way right from day 1. Then on Thursday, we ran a workshop to collaboratively define our purpose, KPIs and metrics. We needed to make sure that we knew what success looked like and how we would measure it. And finally, on the Friday, and I'm still surprised that we managed to get the stakeholders to agree to this, we put the entire team in the passenger seat. So we arranged for every single person on the team to visit a driving test centre. This enabled them to speak to driving examiners to better understand user needs, to be able to sit in the waiting room and observe the people that are about to take the test. And then they actually got to sit on a live driving test and see the end-to-end journey for themselves. And in many ways, the thing that had the most impact, I think, on the first week and maybe for the first part of the project was actually when the team came back to the office and shared their stories. So, we heard of a tale of a candidate who nearly reversed into a bollard and failed for the 6th time. There was another candidate who felt that he had squashed a cat, but he hadn't squashed a cat, but he was really worried about this cat. And then there was the delight of a young woman a single woman who passed the test, and it meant that she could now start commuting to her new job and pick her child up much more easily. And these stories really stayed with the team, and it really helped them to start to see things from a very human perspective rather than a technical product perspective.
So by the end of that inception week, where we put a lot of effort into kind of building that empathy, getting the team up to speed, understanding the vision, lots of measures, we had a team that was full of empathy, compassion, completely focused on user needs. We'd set up our ways of working and our principles that were going to guide us in everything we did over the phase. And we also had a really super clear vision about what was needed to be delivered and how we could measure the success of what we were delivering. But when teams start to knuckle down and start focusing on the delivery, it's really, really easy for the conversations to become all about story points and velocity, because ultimately that's how a lot of stakeholders measure progress of projects, right? So when your project's about 74 weeks long, how can you keep the focus on the things that really do add value, not just the story points and velocity? So how can you avoid that kind of meh zone and that feeling of, so how do you keep that continual momentum? How do you keep continuous improvement and not just cranking the handle? So we kind of asked ourselves the question, how might we help teams to continually deliver outcomes at pace and scale over the duration of the phase? How can we avoid that meh zone feeling? And so let's talk about some of the key things that we did to ensure that the teams maintain their focus.
So to understand that, let's talk a little bit about delivery. So in this diagram, you'll see that there are 2 streams there of activities focused on delivery. The top track, the blue track there, is focused on creating the right design at the team's product or feature level. And it's about testing and designing the thing so the thing is ready to be built. Below that is a delivery track, which is usually where the larger resourcing costs are. That's usually where the bulk of the people that within teams are often focused on the technical side. And this group, or this is often focused on story points and velocity, and essentially they're trying to ensure that the thing is tested and built in the right way. And this approach is really effective in delivering features and products, but it can miss out on the insights that human-centered design can bring, which essentially really help to ensure that you're building the right thing in the first place. So in this diagram, you see in DES, we had a 3rd track, which in many ways is making sure that you kind of know what it is that is really needed. And this idea comes from a guy called Dave Mulaf, and there's a link here as well on this page if you want to find out a little bit more. But what Dave recognized was the need for a track at the beginning of the process that focuses purely on user needs and understanding those in a much broader context. And by adding this 3rd independent parallel track, it meant that we could do much more foundational research and helping understand user needs in a much broader context. And in many ways, this was around ensuring the team not only built things right, but they built the right things and stayed laser focused on user needs throughout the development phase. And in many ways, this track is about reducing risk. You know, with more upfront effort in understanding user needs, you're going to get less effort in rework and delivery later on in the process. So what did we do in the understanding track there? Well, I think one of the key things that we did on this project is we designed for driving examiners with driving examiners. So we didn't have a team of people in an office somewhere cranking some designs out and hoping that they would work through endless rounds of usability testing. We actually went out and visited over 50 driving test centres across the UK. And we listened to the concerns, and we shared our progress, and we did interviews, usability testing, and most importantly, we conducted co-creation workshops. And this is a picture from one of those workshops. This is 8:10 on a Tuesday morning in a Manchester driving test centre. And we turn up with giant post-it notes and scissors, and we asked the driving examiners to redesign the layout of the form. And in many ways, the really important thing out of these sessions wasn't the actual outputs that were produced, it was the insight and the conversation. It was that understanding, really deep understanding of what it was that these people needed from this product or service to make it really easy for them to use. The team took a multidisciplinary approach to problem solving. That it really was a team where everybody had a voice. It was an open forum based on trust and mutual respect. We also held fortnightly show and tells to share our work across the DVSA, and often had people from 60 plus from across the agency, many of which didn't really have any involvement in our project, but were interested and curious about how we were doing and what we were doing. And we used a range of design thinking activities and methods to engage with stakeholders and with driving examiners, from facilitation, co-creation workshops, to holding screen reviews with policy managers. We had whole areas in the office where we would produce a lot of kind of lo-fi artifacts to begin with, and get feedback, involve people in the process of design and refining the solutions and producing clickable prototypes and with these and for test centres and things as the project progressed. Another key thing about this project is we recruited a tribe of what we called early adopters. And these were from across the UK, and they were purposely chosen for having a mixed level of digital confidence. And we connected them initially by conducting an onboarding workshop. And then we visited their test centres, and they in turn became an extension of our team, and they helped to support other examiners by visiting them in their local test centres and giving them updates, providing basic training and advice. But they also helped with usability testing, and they also helped to reduce the amount of time it was taking to get feedback. You know, we had bi-weekly calls with them where we'd update them on our progress, but we'd get them to tell us about some of their findings and their insights that they were getting from driving examiners, and ask them to help us with usability testing, which really helped us to speed up the iteration process. At the start of the project, we had very much a focus on qualitative research. We tried to keep it very human, and we were looking for these kind of stories that everyone could relate to, which would help guide our decision making. And this quote was from a driving examiner up in Scotland, and it became a bit of a mantra for all design decisions that we were making. So if we were looking at moving layouts or buttons and things, the question we would ask ourselves is, will this work for blind dinosaur with sausage fingers? And quite quickly that would give us the answer and give us some guidance in terms of what we needed to do. But as the project progressed, we relied a lot more on quantitative data. We wanted to check those early assumptions were correct. And we helped this by creating a data dashboard, which meant we could track live information and understand driving examiners' behaviours at a much deeper level. We tackled the biggest challenge first, which for us was about safety. We were giving a device to driving examiners to use in a moving vehicle. We needed to make sure that it was going to work. So we conducted a whole range of usability studies. We consulted with world-renowned experts in the field in terms of using user interface devices in moving vehicles. And we did something like over 100 in-car usability tests to evaluate driving examiners' ability to log test results, research the cognitive demands of using the app in lifelike scenarios. And this really helped to inform the level of training required and gave us a lot of insight into how we could optimize our app so that a driving examiner could use it really, really easily. We also made sure the service worked for everybody. So there were some limitations to the previous service that was very paper-based. So we wanted to make sure that we included users with additional needs and those on the assisted digital scale and help ensure that everybody could use this service. And we also successfully completed an independent accessibility audit and wrote an accessibility statement in line with government guidelines. And we traveled a lot. You know, we took up every opportunity we could. Every event that DVSA were holding, we would go to and we would attend. We would ask for feedback. We would listen to concerns, and we asked lots and lots and lots of questions. And all of these things really helped the team stay laser focused on user needs throughout the project. And perhaps most importantly, it gave the whole team a sense of progress and a sense of purpose. You know, as a team, we weren't just completing story points and delivering code. We're actually delivering real value by solving real problems for real people and helping to make driving examiners' lives just that little bit easier.
So let's talk a little bit about how we actually delivered some of that value. So specifically about releases or shipping service. So often when you're working on a project or a service, initial thoughts are that the only time you really can deliver value is once you've delivered all the things. So in this example, once you've delivered a driving test, because it's the driving test service, right? However, what we set about doing was looking at value in a different way. So let's apply a different lens to the way value is kind of articulated on projects. So what we did, we took a look and felt that there was something we could ship earlier that would deliver value to the users. And within 2 months of the project, what we did, we shipped what we called the familiarization app. So what this was essentially a tarted up version of the alpha prototype from the earlier phase with some bells and whistles and training information in it, which enabled our end users to try out their devices. We mentioned some of them were nervous about using them. It enabled them to see what the app was likely to look like when we did ship it. It enabled them to practice in a safe space. Some of them were nervous about the change from moving from paper to an app. Some of them have been using that particular paper form for 30 plus years. So there was a degree of nervousness, and this gave them some space to learn. And it also, and most importantly, gave us an opportunity to get some feedback really quickly and enabled us to collate that feedback about how we could make the app even easier and better to use. So let's kind of take a look at how we broke that down a little bit more. So in that first kind of image on the left, the help me section, so that's the familiarization app. That was the first element of value we delivered. And the natural way to carve up this project would then be following the different test categories. So car, motorcycle, trailer, truck, tank, all of those types of things. And that's pretty much what we did, but there were other elements of value within there as well. So what we identified straight after the familiarization app was that what we could also do was provide essentially the driving examiner's diary, which is the appointments they had for tests during that day, through the device. So in the paper-based world, what they had to do was actually be in the driving test center close to a physical printer where it printed out their schedule. And that's what they used for the day. And obviously we all know change happens. So during the day, their schedule may change. People may cancel, people may change appointments, such like. They had to be near the printer to know there was a change waiting for them. So what we identified was that by shipping out a digital version of their diary, essentially, we could add some real value to them in terms of familiarization, as we talked about earlier, but also some actual real user value, because they now were no longer dependent on being near the printer. Then we moved into taking the test. Another element we had was that in terms of a fallback option in case digital failed, we needed to deliver something. But until that dependency was in place on the iPad to deliver the app, there was always the option to go back to the old paper-based form. So we didn't need to work on that or to release it until later on, and that dependency had been built up. So there was another release for us, admin and reporting as well. So the point is, in the Agile delivery model, what we're looking to do is to ship early, often, to get feedback and to de-risk our releases and prove all of our infrastructure and release processes work. I already mentioned we had third parties involved in that. That was a tricky thing to coordinate. The more we shipped, the better we got at it. The first few took quite a while to organize and get going, but as we got further on through the project, it became kind of like clockwork. We were able to ship incredibly frequently. And when you can break your work down into small chunks, it also gives the teams something to focus on. A 2-3 sprint target is much better than a 74-week target. And what that leads to is focus, and that enables teams to deliver burn down charts that look like that. Yes, a burn down doesn't necessarily mean value, but when you have a short time frame and objective to hit and value and measures associated with it, it leads to a very happy delivery manager. So moving back to the project timeframes now. So we completed the UK's first live digital driving test on October the 3rd, 2019, and it went pretty much without a hitch. Following that, we had a small cohort of driving examiners that quickly ramped up, and by the end of February, we'd completed over 500,000 driving tests, which is pretty phenomenal. We passed our GDS assessment with flying colours in the November. What I was particularly pleased with this was the comment around the spirit in which we met the service standard. We really did aim to embrace the ethos of user centricity and team-based delivery. But the team's journey on the beta phase was starting to come to an end now, which kind of brings us to our final question. So how might we create a lasting change? So how can we help shift culture and create that lasting change and deliver? As a consultancy company, what we can do is deliver a product or a service all year long. That's what we do. We're software delivery experts. But what we like to do is to help change that culture and behavior of organizations to enable them to take over the service moving forward. And we'd gained an enormous amount of insight into the project, and we wanted to make sure that wasn't lost.
So what did we do? Well, I guess one of the main things that we did is we engaged and integrated a continuous improvement team right from the start. So we had people from DVSA in the project right from the beginning, and as the project developed, more of that continuous improvement team were integrated, and they were able to then learn how we were working. We were able to align them with human-centered design, able to help them to really understand how Agile and human-centered design work together. We also helped to upskill them in new technology, so they were new to building apps and working in that kind of way, and also to help them with their awareness of government digital service standards and give them some help in preparation for their assessment should it come at a later date. We built a whole bunch of robust and scalable assets, including a design system. So there wasn't a design system in place from a GDS perspective for apps. So it was very much a web-based design system that GDS currently have. And we were developing an app that was being deployed onto an iPad device. So we built a number of frameworks that they could then use almost as a toolkit to continue the future development. We did a lot to share lessons learned and support the DVSA's multi-agency approach. So we played an active role in the service design community within DVSA and shared best practice with other agencies and worked alongside the DVSA to help them achieve their strategic vision. So in this picture here, you can see we're taking part in a workshop around design systems with DVSA, and I think there are at least 1, 2, 3, probably 4 different agencies in that photo. We also worked seamlessly with the internal team, so we wanted to become an extension of their internal capabilities, and we worked with people really closely like change management, the staff enablement group, the communications team. We wanted to help the DVSA share the progress of this project and share good news stories and keep the entire agency up to speed on the project's latest development. And DVSA in their part, they did some really great stuff. So they set up their own internal Yammer group, and it became the most popular one within quite a short space of time, and they were able to use that to share the project's progress and actually get feedback as well from driving examiners that are out there. It was a really useful tool to help make this change. And we looked for other ways, I guess, just to raise internal capabilities. So we ran a couple of workshops, including design thinking lunch and learn. And none of the people that are actually in this or took part in this were anything to do with the project. They were just people from DVSA that were interested in human-centered design and agile ways of working, and were keen to learn. And we did a number of these things to help change the kind of overall culture from a DVSA perspective.
So also investing time in those people in other ways. So we mentioned at the start of the presentation about the stakeholder team being new to digital and agile delivery. So we spent a lot of time and effort coaching and mentoring those people. Ultimately, they had an awful lot of knowledge about the service, which we needed to kind of extract and collaborate with and use to deliver the project. But also what we wanted to do was bring about that lasting change with them as well, so that they could take over ownership of that service as it had evolved into a new digital service. So here's a nice little note from one of the product owners acknowledging the effort we put into that. So, you know, leaving that positive legacy behind us. So what are our top 3 takeaways then? So at the heart of every successful digital transformation, it's people and relationships, really. It's not just technology. So in many ways, the key technical skills needed are more aligned to what we might consider those soft skills. So critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, communication, collaboration, trust, you know, and these are the skills that make us all human. And we believe that they're the skills and capabilities that really enable and empower teams to perform. So don't forget that project is your own journey of delivery. Adapt yours to suit your context, but here are some of the things from ours that will help. So make sure you start with impact, and make sure that once you have that impact, understanding and vision, you maintain momentum. So maintaining that momentum as you go through by keeping that focus on user needs and keeping it human-centric. You can then start to close the loop between the strategy and the delivery, and then you're much more likely to create that lasting organizational change. So ultimately, sometimes you do have to strap yourself into the passenger seat. It can be a particularly bumpy ride, especially if you do hit a cat, which I'd just like to clarify, nobody hit a cat, it was totally fine. But it can be a really bumpy ride, but enjoy it.
Yeah, no animals were injured in the preparation of this presentation, just to clarify. So if you're interested in learning more, I'd really recommend these books, particularly The Good Services by Lou Dow. It's a light read. It'll give you a really good insight into service design, but also The Digital Transformation at Scale. That book's written by a whole bunch of people that worked at GDS for quite some time. And it actually talks about the change management side in some depth as well, which is definitely worth a read.
Here are some good delivery books as well. So Impact Mapping by Gojko Adzik and User Story Mapping by Jeff Patton. The Jeff Patton book, if you're going to buy one book about agile delivery, buy that one. Both of those books are really interesting techniques and are go-to techniques for me about how to break a really large problem down into manageable chunks. And The Phoenix Project is just a great book. You should totally read it. And
we've got a few plugs at the end, I think, now, haven't we?
Yeah, just a few little plugs. So as I mentioned, BGSS and Spark. So we are the UK's largest privately owned technology and business consultancy. We're hiring across the country and the globe.
And we've got a number of other events kind of scheduled. There's a couple in particular, I guess, that I'd like to plug. So we've got a session next Tuesday with Spark called we.gov. And this is about government service standards. And we've got a panel there that are all experienced in getting through assessments and cover things from a wide perspective. So we've got a user researcher, we've got a strategist, we've got a service designer, we've got a product designer. They're all experienced, and it's a really good opportunity to pose some questions to them and find out what they have to say. But we're also running a Spark service design takeaway. So this is for people that are perhaps more interested in service design as an area to get into or to learn from. We've got 7 seasoned service designers, which is quite hard to say. And then it's our spin on lightning talks. They're each going to give a 5-minute insight into one aspect of service design. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff as well. If you check them out all on bgsa.com/events, and you'll see what else is happening next week. So that's us. If you have any questions, if you want to stick them in the Q&A, me and Lee will hang around for as long as the questions keep coming. And if not, then have a wonderful day, and thank you very much for joining us.